The moment when life loses its color. There comes a moment in every human life when the world grows strangely silent. It does not announce itself with thunder or catastrophe. It arrives quietly, almost politely, like a soft dimming of the lights in a room you did not notice had been bright. One morning you open your eyes and something is missing. Not an object, not a person, but a pulse, a spark, a sense of aliveness that once moved through your blood like electricity. You stand in the same room, among the same people, breathing the same air, yet everything feels slightly out of focus. Colors are muted. Sounds feel distant. Your favorite music no longer stirs your chest. The food you used to love tastes strangely flat. The things that once pulled you forward with enthusiasm now barely move you at all. You try to force excitement, but it slips through your fingers like smoke. You try to laugh, but the sound feels borrowed, as if it belongs to a version of you that no longer exists. You begin scrolling through songs, through videos, through messages, searching for something, anything, that might crack the numbness. But nothing reaches you. You feel separated from life by a thin, invisible wall. Present, but not present. Awake, but not awake. Breathing, but not living. And somewhere inside your mind, a whisper rises, soft but undeniable. What is happening to me? It is here that many people make a mistake. They assume something is wrong with them. They label themselves broken, unmotivated, burned out, or weak. They try to push harder, to pretend, to keep up the performance. But pretending becomes exhausting. Pushing becomes impossible. The more they resist this emptiness, the deeper it grows. They feel guilt for not being excited, shame for not being able to enjoy what everyone else seems to enjoy, grief for a self that feels like it is slipping away. But Carl Jung would tell you something different. He would tell you that this emptiness is not a malfunction. It is not a failure. It is not the end of your life. It is the end of the life you were never meant to live. It is the death of a mask, the collapse of a persona, the unraveling of a self that was built to survive, not to become. When nothing feels interesting anymore, when the world turns gray, when the soul feels distant, it is not because you are losing yourself. It is because you are about to meet yourself. You were never meant to stay in the shallows. You were not designed for a life of constant noise and endless stimulation. You were made for depth, for meaning, for a connection so intimate with your own soul that even silence feels full. But before you can reclaim that connection, everything false must fall away. The roles you learned to play, the dreams that were handed to you, the expectations you inherited from a world that rewards performance and punishes authenticity, all of it must be shed. And shedding feels like boredom. It feels like numbness. It feels like nothing. But nothing is the doorway. Nothing is the threshold. Nothing is the beginning. This is the moment when the old self dissolves and the deeper self begins to stir. The moment when the soul refuses to be fed by distractions. The moment when truth starts to whisper beneath the noise. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, a descent not into failure but into reality, a sacred unraveling that reveals who you were beneath the masks you did not know you were wearing. The question now is not how to make life interesting again. The question is whether you have the courage to follow where this silence is leading you. Because it is leading you inward. It is leading you to the self you abandoned. It is leading you to the meaning you lost. The emptiness is the invitation. The numbness is the messenger. The boredom is the bridge. And when you finally step across that bridge, you do not step into darkness. You step into truth. There comes a moment in every human life when the familiar world begins to dissolve, not with violence but with an eerie quiet. You notice it first in the smallest ways. Music that once lifted you now feels flat. The jokes that once made you laugh feel strangely distant. The hobbies you used to cling to for relief no longer pull you in. You look at your life and nothing feels wrong, yet nothing feels right either. It is as if a veil has dropped over your senses and the colors have dimmed. At first you try to shake it off, thinking it is fatigue or stress or some temporary phase. But the feeling lingers. It follows you from morning to night like a soft haunting. This is the moment most people begin to panic. They start to fear that they are losing interest in life itself. They worry that they are becoming cold or numb or broken. But this numbness is not the end. It is the threshold. It is the first sign that your soul is no longer willing to live on autopilot. Something ancient within you is stirring, and it is demanding your attention. Carl Jung wrote, that the greatest tragedies of human life often begin as subtle whispers from the unconscious. They come disguised, not as dramatic breakdowns, but as emptiness. He believed that when the psyche can no longer tolerate the life you are pretending to live, it begins to dim the lights. It takes the flavor out of your days. It removes the false excitement. It strips the world of shallow meaning so that you are forced to turn inward, not because you chose to, but because you have no choice left. This is the death of the persona, the quiet collapse of the mask you have worn for so long that you forgot you were wearing it. All your life you have been shaped by expectations. Be the good one. Be the strong one. Be the accomplished one. Smile when you are tired. Show up when you are empty. Pretend everything is fine because that is what everyone expects. The world rewards personas, but the soul does not. And eventually the soul reaches a breaking point. It refuses to fuel the performance any longer. When nothing feels interesting anymore, it is not because life has lost its magic. It is because the false life has lost its power over you. The roles that once defined you no longer fit. The ambitions that once drove you no longer matter. The distractions that once kept you numb no longer work. And beneath this collapse, something deeper begins to breathe for the first time in years. This is the descent Jung spoke of. The sacred descent into your own unconscious. Not a fall into darkness, but a fall into truth. A fall into the parts of yourself you abandoned because someone told you they were too much or not enough. The shadow begins to rise, not to frighten you, but to free you. All the parts of you that never had permission to exist begin to press against the surface of your life. The forgotten desires, the neglected creativity, the unspoken anger, the unhealed grief. Nothing is wrong with you. Everything is waking up. But awakening does not feel like enlightenment at first. It feels like confusion. It feels like the world turning gray. It feels like the collapse of everything familiar. The ego assumes something is wrong. The mind begins to run. But the soul is not trying to harm you. It is trying to remove the noise that has kept you blind to yourself. This emptiness is the silence before truth. The clearing of space so that something real can finally enter. You are not losing interest in life. You are losing interest in the life that was never yours, the routines that suffocated you, the identities that imprisoned you, the goals that were handed to you rather than born from you. The emptiness is not the absence of meaning, it is the demand for meaning. And slowly, quietly, as you sit in this grayness, something begins to shift, not outside of you, but within. A small spark, a faint pulse, the early signal of a new life. Not the life expected of you, but the life that belongs to you. That is why this numbness is not a failure. It is your invitation. You were taught from childhood to value movement more than meaning. Keep going. Stay busy. Do more. The world applauds those who are constantly in motion and quietly shames those who sit still long enough to hear the truth within themselves. So when the numbness arrives, your first instinct is to run from it. You fill your days with tasks hoping productivity will drown out the ache. You surround yourself with noise hoping distraction will shock you back into feeling alive. But no matter how much you do, the emptiness remains like a low hum beneath everything. This is because the numbness is not trying to be fixed. It is trying to be heard. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in three primary languages: silence, symbols, and suffering. When you ignore the first two, the third becomes louder. It is not punishment. It is precision. It is the psyche trying desperately to communicate what your conscious mind has refused to acknowledge. You are not tired because you lack motivation. You are tired because you have lived too long disconnected from your inner world. Every mask has weight. Every role requires energy to maintain. Every time you betray what you feel to fit what is expected of you, a part of your soul retreats deeper into the shadows. Eventually, the retreat becomes so complete that you look around and realize you are living a life that is barely connected to the truth of who you are. The emptiness you feel right now is the result of this distance. The distance between the person you show the world and the person you actually are. The distance between the life you built and the life you long for. The distance between the self you perform and the self that waits. The world calls this boredom. Psychology calls it dissociation. Jung called it the refusal of the soul. He taught that when the conscious life becomes too narrow, when it no longer reflects the fullness of your inner nature, the psyche begins to withdraw its energy. It no longer fuels the persona. It no longer excites the roles. It no longer animates your old identity. This is why everything feels flat. Your soul is no longer feeding the surface of your life. And so you feel split. One part of you moves through the world on autopilot, completing routines without presence. The other part stands behind a glass wall, witnessing your life from a distance, wondering when you will finally stop pretending. This inner split is not a flaw. It is the early stage of integration. The moment when the unconscious begins to demand participation in your waking life. But most people resist this. They try to force themselves to feel what they no longer feel. They shame themselves for not enjoying what they used to. They cling to the old pleasures, hoping they will reignite something inside them. But you cannot resurrect a life you have outgrown, and you cannot force joy where your soul no longer belongs. The truth is that nothing outside of you has changed. You have changed. You are sensing the misalignment. You are feeling the cost of living in a way that does not honor your inner landscape. You are reaching the edge of an identity that can no longer contain you. This is why the world seems dull. It is not because life lacks beauty. It is because you have been surviving on the surface for too long. The soul is demanding depth again, authenticity again, presence again. You may think you need more excitement, but excitement is not what you are starving for. You are starving for intimacy with your own being, for meaning that moves your chest, for the kind of truth that breaks you open and rebuilds you into someone real. And that cannot be found in distractions. It can only be found in dissent. The dissent is uncomfortable. It strips away the illusions you relied on. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you abandoned. It reveals the truth behind every numb moment, but it also begins to guide you back to the inner world you have ignored. The numbness is not stealing your life. It is saving it. It is the first step in your return to wholeness. It is the symptom of a soul that refuses to be lost. And once you begin to understand this, the grayness becomes less frightening. It becomes a message, a threshold, a doorway into yourself. There comes a point in this inner descent when the silence grows so wide that it becomes almost unbearable. You sit in your room and feel the stillness pressing against your skin like a quiet weight. You scroll through your phone not because you care, but because you are avoiding the truth, waiting behind the stillness. The world around you keeps spinning, but you feel as if you have stepped outside of it. You are not fully here, and yet you are not fully gone. You are suspended in a strange in-between space that feels both frightening and familiar. This is the threshold Jung called the dark night of the soul. Not a punishment, but an initiation. It is the moment when the distractions fall away and the unconscious begins to rise. You start to feel emotions that do not match your daily life. A sadness you cannot explain. A longing that seems older than your memories. A quiet grief that feels like it belongs to someone you used to be. These feelings arrive without warning. They surface like waves from a depth you did not know existed. This is the shadow beginning to awaken. The shadow is not your darkness. It is your wholeness. It is everything you pushed aside to survive the expectations placed upon you. The anger you never expressed. The desires you silenced. The dreams you abandoned to be accepted. The grief you swallowed because there was no space for weakness. The wildness you locked away because someone told you it was too much. The sensitivity you hid because the world rewarded toughness. All of this begins to move beneath your consciousness like an ocean rising. Most people run from this moment. They busy themselves with work. They drown the silence with noise. They numb the ache with pleasure. They keep the persona intact because the persona feels safe. But the persona was never meant to contain an entire soul. And sooner or later the soul begins to push back. You feel it as restlessness, as irritation, as a sense that you are living inside the wrong life. You feel it as tears that rise without a reason, as impulses you cannot explain, as dreams that shake you awake in the middle of the night. This is not madness. This is memory. The memory of who you were before the world told you who you should be. Jung wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their souls. This is why humans chase excitement, why they cling to stimulation, why they panic when boredom strikes, because stillness leaves us alone with ourselves. And many people have never met the person living inside their own chest. But in this numbness, you are finally being asked to meet that person. The one beneath the roles, the one beneath the masks, the one beneath the expectations, the one who has waited patiently for you to stop pretending. When nothing feels interesting, it is because the soul refuses to be fed by the shallow anymore. It is no longer satisfied by temporary highs or external validation. It wants what is real. It wants truth raw and unfiltered. It wants your attention, your honesty, your willingness to look at the parts of yourself you have buried. This is why the world feels distant. You are being pulled inward, not away from life but toward the center of your own being. At this stage, it becomes tempting to diagnose yourself as broken. You tell yourself that you are losing passion or losing motivation or losing your spark. But you are not losing anything. You are shedding. You are shedding the distractions that kept you numb. You are shedding the expectations that kept you small. You are shedding the persona that kept you safe but suffocated. You are shedding the life you outgrew. And beneath every layer you shed, there is another truth waiting for you. A deeper one, a louder one, a more ancient one. The truth you abandoned in order to survive. The truth that now returns to help you evolve. This silence is not empty. It is full. Full of what you have refused to feel. Full of what you have not yet understood. Full of the guidance you once ignored. The soul speaks softly, but when necessary it speaks through emptiness. It quiets the world so you can hear the voice you lost within yourself. The ache you feel is not the absence of life. It is the presence of the self finally breaking through. As the silence deepens, something unexpected begins to happen. You no longer feel the urge to chase the things you once believed would save you. The accomplishments that once fueled your ambition start to lose their shimmer. The relationships built on convenience rather than truth begin to feel hollow. The routines that once gave you structure now feel like cages. You start to sense that the life you have been living is not collapsing but dissolving, and in that dissolution, something truer is beginning to emerge. This is the stage where the ego grows afraid. The ego does not fear suffering. It fears transformation. Pain it can negotiate with, but rebirth is something beyond its control. So the ego clings tightly to the old ways. It whispers that you need to be productive again. It urges you to fill your schedule. It convinces you that slowing down means falling behind. But beneath its panic, something deeper within you begins to rise quietly, powerfully, with a presence the ego cannot compete with. This is the self beginning to awaken. The self is not a personality. It is not a mood. It is the core of who you are beneath every mask and every adaptation you learn to wear. The self is the eternal part of you, the one untouched by expectations, untouched by disappointments, untouched by the performance of identity. It is the part of you that watches patiently from within, waiting for the moment when you become quiet enough to feel its presence again. And that moment arrives exactly here, in the grayness, in the numbness, in the stillness you once feared. When the distractions weaken, you begin to sense a pull not outward but inward, a pull towards something you cannot name yet somehow recognize. You begin to notice the small signals first, a strange peace in solitude, a sudden tenderness toward your own tired heart, an intuitive knowing that the life you are leaving behind is too small for the person you are becoming. You feel these moments like soft openings in the center of your chest, doorways into a deeper way of living. Jung taught that the self does not shout. It reveals, it nudges, it guides. It shows you life from a vantage point you could not access while you were running. It asks you to slow down so you can see not with your mind but with your essence. You begin to see how much of your life was built on automatic choices, choices made from fear rather than desire, from obligation rather than truth, from survival rather than authenticity. And this realization hurts not because you have failed but because you have woken up. The truth is that much of your life was not chosen by the real you. It was chosen by the persona, the version of you shaped by family, by society, by trauma, by expectation. That version was built to protect you, not to fulfill you. And now that the persona is dissolving, the self begins to show you everything it has carried beneath the surface. It shows you your long-buried sadness. It shows you the dreams you abandoned. It shows you the desires you were shamed for having. It shows you the grief you never had space to feel. It shows you the creativity that has been starving for expression. It shows you the truth of your longing, the truth of your exhaustion, the truth of your hunger for something real. And for the first time in a long time, you begin to sense that this numbness is not the end. It is preparation. It is the clearing of the soil before new life begins to root. It is the stripping away of what is false to make space for what is true. You are being emptied so that you can be refilled, not with noise, not with stimulation, not with temporary excitement, but with essence. You begin to understand that your soul did not abandon you. It withdrew its energy from the parts of your life that were not aligned with your truth. It refused to fuel the performance. It refused to support a life that betrayed your deeper nature. And now that you stand in this unfamiliar space, the self steps forward to lead. It does not promise comfort. It promises honesty. It does not promise ease. It promises depth. It does not promise excitement. It promises awakening. And deep inside, you know this is what you have been craving all along. Not more fun, more truth. Not more pleasure, more presence. Not more stimulation, more meaning. The world may not understand this shift. It may interpret your quietness as withdrawal, your detachment, as disinterest, your change in priorities as instability. But you know better. You know that these changes are not signs of collapse. They are signs of return. The return to the self, the return to your center, the return to the life you were meant to live. The numbness is the doorway, the awakening is the path, and the self is the guide waiting patiently for you to follow. As you begin to sense the self more clearly, the world around you does not magically brighten. In fact, it often grows more confusing. The things and people that once brought you certainty now bring you questions. The structures that once held you now feel too narrow. The dreams you once chased now seem strangely distant, as if they belong to a different lifetime or a different version of you. This phase is not clarity, it is disruption, and disruption is the birthplace of every genuine awakening. At this point, many people try to force themselves back into the old rhythm of their lives. They tell themselves they should be grateful. They remind themselves they have everything they once wanted. They try to reignite old passions by sheer will. But passion cannot be forced. Joy cannot be resurrected from a life that no longer matches your soul. What once sustained you is now unable to nourish you because you have outgrown the person who once needed it. This is the moment when the unconscious begins to surface in unmistakable ways. You find yourself thinking about paths you abandoned long ago. You remember dreams you buried before they could disappoint you. You feel old wounds ache in ways that feel strangely fresh, as if the body remembers what the mind has forgotten. Jung believed that when you reach this stage, the psyche begins actively pushing toward wholeness. Not gently, not politely, but insistently. You may feel a pull toward solitude, not because you want to escape life, but because you can no longer hear yourself through the noise. You may feel a desire to slow down, not out of laziness, but because something within you has grown tired of performing. You may feel an urge to strip away the unnecessary, to simplify, to make space for something you cannot yet name. These impulses are not symptoms of decline. They are signals of alignment. In this chapter of the inner journey, the soul begins to reveal what it truly longs for. Not excitement, but depth. Not applause, but authenticity. Not stimulation, but connection. The emptiness you fear is not asking you to fill it. It is asking you to listen to it, to sit with what it is showing you, to allow yourself to feel the truth you have avoided. You may begin to notice small flickers of longing that do not match your current life. A desire for creativity that has been dormant. A pull toward different environments, different people, different ways of being. A sense that you are meant to live more consciously, more intentionally, more truthfully. These flickers are not random. They are the earliest signs of your rebirth. This is where the shadow begins to soften. It no longer rises as a threat, but as a companion. It shows you the parts of yourself you abandoned, not to frighten you, but to reunite you with them. The sadness you feel is not weakness. It is recognition. The anger is not corruption. It is protection. The longing is not foolishness. It is guidance. Jung wrote that the shadow holds the treasure of the soul. And now that the persona has cracked open, you can finally see what the shadow has been guarding. Not darkness, but potential. Not shame, but truth. Not injury, but insight. Everything you pushed away is now returning because it must be integrated to complete the next version of your life. This stage is tender, vulnerable, sacred. You feel softer than before, but stronger in ways you cannot explain. You feel more alone than ever, but somehow more connected to something vast and ancient. You feel the ache of your own becoming, and it is both painful and beautiful. You are shedding illusions and the shedding stings, but the freedom beneath it is undeniable. Slowly, the numbness begins to shift. Not into joy yet, but into presence. Colors are still muted, but they no longer feel dead. Silence is still heavy, but it no longer feels suffocating. The world is still quiet, but you can feel a pulse beneath it. A pulse that seems to echo inside your own chest. A pulse that whispers you are not lost. You are returning. There comes a moment in this inner transformation when something subtle begins to shift inside you. It does not arrive with fireworks or revelation. It arrives like a quiet breath you did not realize you were holding. You wake up one morning and notice that the numbness feels slightly different. Not gone, but loosened. Not lifted, but softened. The world still looks muted, but it no longer feels unreachable. You begin to sense that something within you is reorganizing itself beneath the surface. This is the beginning of reorientation. At this stage, you are no longer trying to resurrect the old version of yourself. You have stopped bargaining with the past. You have stopped begging for your former passions to return. You have stopped forcing yourself to fit into the shapes you once wore to survive. Instead, a strange acceptance begins to grow, an understanding that the person you once were cannot guide you where you are now going. Jung believed that all genuine growth begins with surrender. Not surrender to defeat, but surrender to truth. You are no longer resisting what is happening inside you. You are beginning to allow it. You are beginning to trust the process even though you cannot yet see where it leads. That willingness marks the moment transformation becomes inevitable. And then something else begins to unfold. You start to sense pieces of yourself reconnecting in quiet ways. You feel a faint stirring of curiosity about things you have not touched in years. A memory awakens. A desire flickers. A dream you once buried moves slightly beneath the soil. It is not excitement. It is not passion. It is something deeper. A small whisper from the self saying, "I am still here." You begin to notice meaning in places you once overlooked. A line from a book lingers in your mind longer than expected. A conversation feels strangely significant. A simple walk outside feels less like passing time and more like returning to your senses. The world is not brighter. You are simply more present. You are beginning to see again, not with the eyes of the persona, but with the eyes of your soul. This is the moment when the unconscious begins to collaborate with your waking life in new ways. Dreams become clearer. Intuition becomes sharper. You start to feel guided not by logic, but by an inner compass that seems older than your thoughts. You do not know where it is taking you, but you can feel its honesty. You can feel its pull. You can feel its clarity even in the confusion. Jung taught that the psyche moves toward wholeness naturally when we stop interfering. That is what is happening inside you now. Your inner world is rearranging itself to match your truth rather than your conditioning. You are no longer performing. You are beginning to listen. And listening is the first step toward alignment. This reorientation also brings unexpected grief. As you sense your true self rising, you begin to see more clearly the parts of your life that were built without it. You notice the relationships that never saw you. You recognize the dreams that were never truly yours. You feel the heaviness of years spent living in roles that kept you comfortable but not alive. This grief is not a setback. It is a cleansing. It is the soul making room for what is real. You are beginning to understand that the life you thought was empty was not empty at all. It was full of noise that blocked you from hearing yourself. And now that the noise has faded, you can finally sense the depth beneath your own silence. You can feel the beginnings of a shift inside you. A shift from seeking stimulation to seeking truth. From seeking distraction to seeking connection. From seeking comfort to seeking meaning. This stage is not dramatic. It is subtle. It feels like the faintest of awakenings. A quiet realization that you are no longer who you were, yet not fully who you are becoming. You are in the in-between space where most people turn back. But you are learning to stay. You are learning to breathe here. You are learning to trust that this inner movement is leading you somewhere sacred, and with that trust a new form of strength emerges. Not the strength of pretending you are fine, not the strength of pushing through, not the strength of performance, but the strength of honesty, the strength of being with yourself exactly as you are, the strength of allowing your inner world to unfold without rushing it or fearing it. You begin to walk differently. You begin to think differently. You begin to inhabit your own presence with a softness you did not have before. You stop demanding constant excitement because you understand now that excitement is shallow, but depth is eternal. You stop fearing the quiet because you know the quiet is where your truth lives. Something inside you is preparing you, not for a return to the old life, but for the emergence of a life rooted in wholeness. A life built not from masks, but from essence. A life guided by the self, not the persona. You can feel that life approaching. You can feel it forming inside you like a new dawn still hidden beneath the horizon. This reorientation is the soul's way of whispering you are close. There comes a moment in this journey when the silence you once feared becomes the very place you begin to belong. Not because life has suddenly grown brighter, but because you have changed the way you move through it. The emptiness that once felt like a collapse now begins to feel like a clearing. A space that no longer terrifies you because you finally understand what it is for. It is the space in which the self steps forward. This stage is the beginning of inner alignment. You start to realize that your lack of interest was never a sign of failure. It was a sign of misalignment. It was your soul refusing to participate in a life that no longer fit your truth. You feel this now not as an idea but as a lived reality. You sense that the boredom was not the end. It was the doorway. Now you begin to walk through it with a new awareness. You start noticing that your mind is quieter, not empty, but quieter. The constant internal chatter loses its grip. The opinions of others begin to feel distant, as if they no longer have authority over your direction. You begin to sense yourself again not as a collection of roles or performances, but as a presence. A quiet, steady presence that feels more real than anything you built before. At this point, the world has not changed, yet everything in your perception shifts. You notice subtle beauty in places you once overlooked. A line of sunlight on the floor, the texture of a breath, the rhythm of your footsteps on the ground. These moments feel almost sacred, not because they are special, but because you are finally present with them. For the first time in years, you are not looking past your life. You are in it. This is the essence of awakening. Not a dramatic rise into ecstasy, but a gentle return to your senses. Jung believed that true transformation is quiet because it happens inside the deepest layers of the psyche. You are experiencing that now. You feel the slow emergence of an inner anchor that holds you steady in a way that external validation never could. You begin to trust yourself, not because you have become perfect, but because you are becoming honest. And with honesty comes clarity. You start seeing the truth of your past choices, the moments when you betrayed yourself to be liked, the situations you stayed in long after your soul went silent, the ways you forced yourself to be small so others would feel comfortable. This clarity hurts, but it is a sacred hurt. It is the pain that opens the door to freedom. As you continue walking inward, something unexpected happens. You begin to feel compassion for your former self, the one who distracted, the one who numbed, the one who chased excitement because emptiness felt unbearable. You no longer judge that version of you. You understand now that they were surviving. They were trying. They were doing their best with what they knew. This compassion reveals a truth you could not see before. The emptiness was never the enemy. It was the invitation. It was the call. And now that you have answered it, life begins to form around you differently. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. You start setting boundaries without guilt. You start choosing solitude without shame. You withdraw from noise not to escape life, but to hear it more clearly. You say no without trembling because you finally understand that every no is a yes to something truer within you. This is the moment when individuation becomes real, not as a concept, but as a lived state of being. You feel yourself step out of the persona and into the soul. You feel the difference between performing your life and inhabiting it. You feel the weight of masks fall away, not all at once, but piece by piece, each drop revealing another layer of your truth. And then you begin to notice something subtle yet profound. You are no longer searching for meaning. You are creating it. In small choices, in quiet moments, in honesty, in presence. You no longer ask, what can make me feel alive? You ask, what can I bring myself to fully experience? You are no longer governed by stimulation. You are guided by depth. This shift changes the way you love, the way you speak, the way you breathe. You no longer reach for people out of loneliness. You reach from fullness. You no longer force connections. You allow them. You no longer need approval. You value resonance. This new way of living feels less dramatic than before, but infinitely more real. And then something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel a pulse of aliveness returning, not the frantic thrill of external excitement, a quieter aliveness, a grounded aliveness, a sacred aliveness. It rises in your chest, not because something impressive happened, but because you are finally here, now, present, awake. The world has color again, not because it changed, but because you did. You have stepped into your depth. You have walked through your darkness. You have faced the silence and discovered it was not the absence of life, but the birthplace of it. And now you stand at the edge of your new beginning. Not a return to who you were, but an arrival into who you truly are. This is the truth Jung devoted his life to revealing. That the path to wholeness is not found in stimulation, but in integration. Not in escaping pain, but in understanding it. Not in chasing excitement, but in awakening to presence. You are not bored. You are becoming. You are not empty. You are clearing space. You are not done. You are starting. There comes a moment in this path where you finally understand the truth. The numbness was not a failure. The emptiness was not a flaw. The silence was not a sign that life had abandoned you. It was the signal. It was the summons. It was your soul calling you home. You have walked through the grayness. You have faced the ache that most people spend their entire lives running from. You have sat with the stillness long enough to hear what it was trying to say. And now you stand on the threshold of your own becoming. You are no longer asking the world to make you feel alive. You are learning to create aliveness from within. You are no longer searching for meaning outside yourself. You are discovering it in the quiet rhythm of your own presence. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. Not perfection, not escape, but the sacred work of becoming whole. And if you are here, if these words have echoed somewhere deep inside you, if you have felt even once the strange sensation that nothing excites you anymore, then understand this. You are not lost. You are entering the beginning, the real beginning, the one that requires honesty instead of performance, depth instead of distraction, presence instead of noise. So now I ask you the only question that matters, the question that determines everything that comes next. Are you willing to stop running and finally listen to your soul? If your answer is yes, even whispered yes, even trembling, yes, then your transformation has already begun. And before you leave this video, take a breath, place your hand on your heart, and remind yourself, you are not broken, you are awakening. If this message found you at the right moment, if you felt seen, if something inside you stirred, I invite you to continue this journey with me. Subscribe for more Jungian psychology, more depth, more truth, more of the guidance your inner world has been waiting for. And if you want to affirm your path, comment below. I am ready to return to myself, so the rest of us walking this path can stand with you. Your soul has waited a long time to be heard. Let this be the moment you finally say, I am listening.